Okay.
There now. I think I've unmuted.
Yes.
Fine. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, friends, family, and hopefully even some new acquaintances coming in. It is a pleasure to welcome you this evening to the ongoing Monday evening discussions about topics related somehow to the Book of Mormon. And this evening, in our Book of Mormon Perspectives Forum, we'll be getting the fourth of a series of presentations on resolutions coming before the Community of Christ World Conference next week. Robert Cook and David DeBarthe will be sharing, and Robert is one of those people who has helped to hold this program together since he discovered how inept I was with the technology. He volunteered and has been the technological guru for us for 4 of the 5 years. And then he persists. Well, he was my friend and acquaintance in Nauvoo when I was doing the dig back in the Mansion House days, back in the 70s. And he is so organized that he was able to find the file that had 100,000 artifacts on it from the Mansion House dig. And I'd had a house fire that wiped me out that way. So he's a remarkable resource in many ways. We also will have David DeBarthe speaking tonight. He is my brother, and he has been with us nearly from the outset of this program as well. And so both of these gentlemen are people that you're well acquainted with if you've been with us. And if you haven't been with us, then they're great people for you to get acquainted with, because the repository of history in the two men, as well as a Leonardo type of interest in other spheres of learning, makes them remarkable, delightful additions to our cause. And so they will be sharing on financial issue relative to governance, and David will be dealing with climate issue. And I think he'll give a brief introduction on the nonviolence issue that is before us as well. If you would please join me in prayer. You call us, Lord, to beat swords into plowshares, spears into pruning hooks. And as we inspect our world, so much at war, we recognize the Prince of Peace cannot be happy with how it looks. And as we gather delegates and visitors to confer an independence, we recognize that for peace to prevail, it is upon you that we must place our dependence. Issues of violence, use of guns, compounding our condition since Adam's fall. We seek to learn to be people of peace, responding to your divine call. And we would want to be better stewards of earth, of each other, and of your word. So we ask your blessing as we contemplate the hope for Zionic governance in our own efforts to listen more carefully to your whispers, the ones your prophets have heard. And we ask that you help us reason together in love. Help us feel the touch of your spirit, the gentle breeze of your holy breath, to cope with life, to experiment with peace, to keep your purposes in us in mind, and to appreciate that life does not end with mortal death, because you came for us. You care for us. You call us by name, and you invite us to reach beyond our mortality, to share with you beyond time and space our role in eternity. And we thank you for these marvelous blessings and the privilege of requesting you to be with us this evening. In the name of Jesus, amen. All right, Robert, I think you probably get to start here, unless the two of you have negotiated otherwise. I think we need to let people know that if you have a preference to be interrupted, or if you want to wait till you've finished presenting, your choice in each case?
I don't have a strong opinion about, when questions come in, so let's just see what happens. Evelyn Dustin, who is a co-mission center president, is here with us, and I invited Kent Levan, who was with us on the previous time that we did one of the two resolutions from our mission center, but I don't see him. But what I thought I would do is, I'm trying to be a little better prepared than I was last time, so I think I can share the text of the resolution. Here we go. How is that? Let me read the resolution, and then I would like to read a document that I've since written. I didn't realize that I was in the beginning that I was going to be requested to make the motion to bring the resolution on the floor and then to give a 5-minute summary or statement about it. So I tried to spend some time preparing a statement that I thought would be a little more appropriate than what was originally in the material. And so I would like to read that after I read the resolution. Resolved that the World Church will operate the financial pool known as the AIP system to invest funds wisely from various field organizations and to provide that those funds will always be available to the field organizations that deposited them, or if the depositor organization cannot act or no longer exists, then the funds will be at the disposal of the next higher administrative organization. So let me read the statement, which has a little more of the background of the issue here. The question is, does the membership of the World Church assembled in conference wish to require that local funds invested in the AIP funds and managed by World Church always remain available for the investors? Many years ago, the World Church offered to act as an investment manager for reserve funds belonging to local congregations, mission centers, and other jurisdictions. That fund, referred to as the AIP fund, has served the jurisdictions of the church well. It has provided both a secure interest-bearing option and a stock market invested option. It has provided loans allowing the local jurisdictions to purchase and maintain buildings. The investors were assured that the funds were secure. Not quite 10 years ago, the World Church experienced a financial disaster. There was a grassroots effort to provide financial aid to the World Church from the field. In spite of these donations, a large number of church employees were let go, both from the field and the administrative staff at the headquarters. Many services of the World Church were operated with a reduced staff that simply could not provide the needed services. One of the services of World Church that was threatened was providing retirement benefits to its staff that were already retired. A program was announced to raise an endowment to assure those retired staff that their benefits would be secure. This was an honorable goal. Donations were solicited. In addition, it was announced that if the donations were not sufficient to meet the goal, that funds from all the AIP accounts would be used to complete the goal under a plan of an indefinite loan at 0% interest. In order to be assured that the AIP funds needed would not be withdrawn in advance, the required portion of all the AIP accounts were frozen. That is, the investors could not withdraw them. Statements were made that the presiding bishopric had primary stewardship over all church funds, both World Church and local, and had the authority to determine the interest rate, if any, for intra-church loans. The local jurisdictions, however, saw this as a change from the previous function of the World Church as their investment manager, and they no longer felt that the AIP fund was a safe place to put their reserve funds. Not only did this shatter the feeling of safety in turning funds over to the AIP fund, but the presiding bishopric attempted to find a way to distribute the burden of raising the required funds among the various jurisdictions of the church, which is inherently doomed to feel unfair to some. In retrospect, it would have been much more unifying if the needed funds were raised by free will donations, with no threat of taking funds if donations were not sufficient. The question is now before the conference with this resolution is whether the World Church is required to protect the assets invested in the AIP funds from both external as well as internal threats or not. If you vote for this resolution, it will hopefully restore confidence in the AIP fund. So a couple of things that may not be obvious is that putting monies in the AIP funds is not required until a local jurisdiction has more than 100,000 in its local funds, at which point the funds over that are required to go into an AIP fund. Well, let's see, let me stop share here. Okay, there we go. So, Evelyn, would you like to maybe fill in about what happened at our mission center level and the conference, et cetera?
Well, first of all, the requirements were not well explained. So we found out that money that was being given sometimes went some other place than what we expected. But what happened was that people were upset that the money that had been, the congregations that had invested money in AIP and the mission center no longer had complete control over those. And in some cases, congregations had not been part of the AIP, so they were not involved in the money that was being threatened to take out of the AIP. So it was inherently unfair. And even if we had gathered all of our AIP accounts together, we would have not have had enough to meet the requirement they had given us. So people were upset about the change in the way things were being done, and that some of the AIP accounts had been frozen at a certain level because they couldn't do things they'd planned to do. And they voted this resolution as a way of hopefully taking care of the situation in the future.
And something that has happened recently is that there, in a couple of different cases, there have been congregations that have wanted to invest funds in an AIP account, but were nervous about doing it and have asked the presiding bishopric if new funds that went into an AIP account could be protected from future freezing or taking. and those requests were denied. As a result, we now are having an inquiry from one of our auditors about why we have not put monies over 100,000 into an AIP account, and needed to explain that it did not seem like the wise thing to do at that point. So it really puts us in an uncomfortable position. And as I think back on it, I don't think there is anything inherently wrong about the change of policy, but I do think that it was done in a way which looked unfair, as Evelyn was saying, and because it also involved raising funds for retirement of World Church employees, seemed to be a little bit self-serving, maybe not directly, but certainly indirectly. And so I think the sudden change, which was done because of a financial disaster, just had some uncomfortable results. And we are now in a position where what seemed to be a safe way of investing local funds doesn't seem to be anymore. And that really is creates situations where the funds are kept in a checking account, for example, where they are not earning any interest, and that's really just not good for anybody. So I think that is where I would like to stop. Paul, do you just want to go on to the next presenter?
I'd like to ask Robert, it would appear the church had a fiduciary responsibility here. And there's a question as to whether that fiduciary responsibility has been met.
There certainly is, but one of the things that's hanging in the background here is the question of what is the relationship between local congregations and mission centers to the world church? Are we all one? Which I think is what has often been presented as the objective. Or are we independent entities who need to have documents between them? I do know that when a loan is given, our campground has what's called a houses of worship loan, that the representatives of the campground are required to sign a mortgage document. And that would tell me that we're dealing with two different entities. And if they're two different entities, yes, I don't think that the AIP fund has been managed properly in this case.
Well, thank you. Please remain available, and let's go ahead and move to David with the climate control issue.
Okay, before we do that, Robert, it was my understanding that there was a government regulation that required the church to establish the retirement fund in such a way that all retirees would be protected. Was that a false or not?
I remember reading about that, and my recollection is that that there is government protection if the World Church had defaulted on their obligation. I don't know whether there could have been any class action suit against the church as a whole or whatever, but I don't recollect that it was that clear that they did it just because of a requirement. And what was being done, up until a few years before that was that, and then this was done in many companies, was that the retirement benefits were promised by the company, and the company paid them out of current earnings each year. So if suddenly the current earnings diminish or disappear, then it threatens the retirement. And so that's why the World Church had wanted to establish an endowment that would provide pretty much total protection for the retired employees of the church. I don't know if any of that helped.
Thank you.
If I could just jump in real quick, are the retirement funds covered by the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation? That's the name of the federal government entity that was set up to cover private company pension funds. And as if you sign up for the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, you then are subject to a whole bunch of rules and regulations about how you run your pensions and have to cover the pension funds and so forth. But I was not aware that private charitable organizations were, I don't know if they were required to also be covered by the PBGC or if that was an opt-in. But if they were covered by the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, then they would be subject to quite an extensive regulatory regime about how the fund was managed and the insurers or the company's responsibility toward fulfilling the pensions. Because if when you're a member of the PBGC, that means that the federal government ultimately is the guarantor of the pension obligations. So they impose a bunch of rules and regulations on how the funds are run as a result of providing that ultimate backup. I'm not expert in this area, but that's just a lawyer's vague recollection of how I think this thing is set up in the United States.
I don't recollect in any of the discussions that I read about this that there was any mention of enrolling in such a fund. So that, and knowing the general approach of the World Church, I think they would have tried to avoid any requirements of that sort. So my thinly educated guess is no, that they were not involved in
So I'm not very expert in it either, but I just that is sort of underlies on the broader issue of private pension obligations in the United States that was set up many years ago, and it's a regulatory regime that's pervasive in the private sector, but I don't know if it's in the nonprofit, and it's pervasive in the profit private sector, but I don't know what the status of nonprofit private sector is.
Yeah, I don't know either, but they presented it as a moral obligation rather than a legal obligation. And we all certainly recognize that. It's a question of how it was brought about. The cheerful giver is not a cheerful giver if there's compulsion.
Okay. If you have questions or comments during my presentation, just please jump in because things flow along and let's get it while it's hot. This resolution comes from the Greater Pacific Northwest USA Mission Center. That's Oregon and Washington, I know. I don't know who, probably some of Idaho. I don't know what all is involved there. And I've been fortunate enough to be in fairly close conversation with at least one of the sponsors of this resolution. So I can emphasize the things that she emphasized to me. So I'm just going to read through the resolution pointing out what they saw as significant. I don't think I need to do much beyond that because I think the resolution does a good job of saying what it is they want to accomplish. So here's the resolution. Resolve that the community of Christ join with others to call for an accelerated, just transition to renewable energy. And they really emphasize that just transition because they point out that there are things like there are many, many workers in the fossil fuel industry. If you yank the jobs away from them, what are they going to do? So there needs to be things set up for retraining, for handling things so that people are treated justly. And so that's part of that emphasis. Also, as I've mentioned last week, there are countries out there, particularly the smaller countries of this Southeast, where fossil fuels are about their only income for the country, other than internally. It's the only export they have. To cut them off, what are they going to do then? And so we want to make sure, they want to make sure that we have a just transition, renewable energy, in a fair and inclusive manner that benefits all people, included instead of a few while. I'll read that again. Instead of the few, while supporting countries and communities most vulnerable to the impacts of climate emergency. So everybody instead of just a few. The second, resolve the community of Christ join with others again to call for the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure to cease. I wish they'd have worded that sentence the other way around, get the cease up front, but you got the message, I hope. Expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure to cease. So those are the two major points that they're making in this resolution. Stop expanding fossil fuel infrastructure and move justly to alternatives, and support an immediate and urgent demand to transition away from all fossil fuel-based energy production. And be it further resolved, the community of Christ call upon the members, congregations, and jurisdictions to declare our intent to divest from fossil fuel investments, following the process that the World Church is modeling. That is, research, educate ourselves, and then divest from companies that continue to invest in and promote fossil fuels. And be it further resolved that the community of Christ declare its support for a just and responsible fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. Now, I suspected, I may be wrong here, but I suspected most of you have never heard of that. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. So I've got a note stuck in here. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative is a diplomatic and civil society campaign to create a treaty to stop fossil fuel exploration and expansion and phase out existing production in line with targets of the Paris Climate Agreement while supporting a just transition to renewable energy. historically in 2015, Pacific Island leaders issued the Suva Declaration on Climate Change during the Pacific Islands Development Forum in Suva, Fiji. They called for the implementation of an internal moratorium on the development and expansion of fossil fuel extracting industries. The Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty Initiative officially launched at the Climate Week NYC in September 25th, 2020, at an event called International Cooperation to Align Fossil Fuel Production with the 1.5 degree centigrade world. And then I found a web page endorsed by, and here's the web page, 135 cities and subnational governments, hundreds of elected officials, including heads of state, ministers and special envoys, parliamentarians, members of the European Parliament, indigenous peoples, over 1 million individuals, and almost 4,000 organizations and institutions. So that's my quick summary of the Northwest Mission Center's resolution on fossil fuel. Questions? Comments?
Yes, if I could. That's so this is a question, really ignorant question about how the Community of Christ is organized. Do you go in North America? Are the mission centers organized that might cross the U.S.-Canadian border? I mean, is it possible this group also includes British Columbia?
Yes.
Or it could include British Columbia. Okay, I just note that it covers sort of broad principles, but it also very specifically covers not expanding the fossil fuel infrastructure. And I would just note that in Western Canada, that's a huge political issue, as I understand it right now, because there's a great push on the part of the Alberta energy interests to build a pipeline through British Columbia to Vancouver or the Pacific Ocean to further expand the export of Alberta oil to the Pacific nations that want it, China, Japan, and so forth. And I'm just wondering if that's a particular context for this resolution, recognizing it's also looking to broad principles, but I'm just wondering if that's a particular aspect of this particular group of the Community of Christ raising this issue, is if the British Columbia members of this mission center are perhaps very concerned about the immediate issue of this big, huge pipeline project, which is very much embroiled in current Canadian politics. So I just throw that little.
Yeah, thank you. I cannot say for sure because I don't know, but I would be very, very surprised if you're not exactly right.
Okay, thank you. As if Paul was polite and raised his hand. I just butted in. Sorry.
Well, I do want to set a good precedent, but you're certainly welcome to jump in too, James. David gave permission for that. I am on 2 points. It would appear that this resolution is urging the Community of Christ to join the Non-Proliferation Treaty. That would appear to be, to me, it would be, well, the first part and then the last part would appear to be connected, or am I pulling that inadvertently?
I'm not following what you're connecting.
Okay, the first part of the resolution said we should join with all kinds of other organizations. Join with others.
We first 2 resolutions have us joining with others.
And so then the intent to divest from fossil fuel, and that would appear to be to be saying then that we should join the non-proliferation treaty.
Certainly joining the treaty would be part of joining with others to call for the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure to cease, because that's what that treaty is asking for. Notice that we're not saying they're not saying anything about stopping fossil fuel totally, but we're stopping the expansion of fossil fuels. And that's what that treaty also recommends.
Well, but it does appear to directly defy the drill, baby, drill idea that comes from our leader, the U.S. president.
So,
Again, if we're going against what the politics of Canada and the politics of the United States is saying, that's a rather curious and precarious position to urge the church to take.
so you're saying that if the church members agree that the fossil fuel industry is hurting the climate, our belief that that creation is sacred should be ignored? I think there are plenty. Let me go down. Well, I don't think we need to, but there are plenty of Doctrine and Covenants as they quote down here that would indicate that we as a church, we being, since I'm a member, we as a church have a responsibility to protect and to be stewards over creation. And here, Doctrine and Covenants 163, 3b, courageously challenge cultural, political, and religious trends that are contrary to the reconciling and restoring purposes of God. So Doctrine and Covenants 163 has already told us to get involved in politics.
And while I raised that point of it putting the church in a contrary position to current political majorities, it appears, I definitely support the idea that we should be following the divine guidance in preference to the current political proclivities.
Well, it's a risk. I certainly agree with that, but I think if we follow what the revelations have been given to us, we need to take the risk.
I see Robert Cook and Blair Bryant both waving on that one.
Does that let me be first?
Deb, I guess you get to call the order, and I don't see you at the moment, so hopefully you're still with us. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
So the resolution talks about researching, educating, divesting from fossil fuels. But if we do that, we need to replace those. And there is one phrase in there that talks about transitioning away from fossil fuels. I presume that means to some other form of energy production. And if that's the case, I would think that, and I've been involved in several local mission center discussions in 2 different mission centers about the issue of solar panels. Interesting reactions all the way from very adverse positions about we shouldn't do any solar to bogging it down in discussion of details. And it seems to me that solar, and I've read, about a lot of the objections to solar, but it seems to me that the balanced approach is that at this point, and probably for a couple of decades at least, solar will be one of the best ways that we can produce electricity without burning fossil fuels. So now, let me say, what is the World Church's position on this? And I will tell you the position of the World Church, and I will tell you the position of the United Church of Christ, which I ran into in my investigations about solar. The World Church is not encouraging and is telling us. Then we did a big project at Camp Nauvoo. We invested $250,000 in solar to meet our demand, and I think that was an excellent thing to do. But there is a federal credit that we're entitled to, which is worth $75,000 of that $250,000. And World Church is telling us we're not allowed to take it. Now, there's a whole history behind this, which I think brings out some of the weaknesses of World Church in approaching an issue like this. The United Community of Christ, I fell across them in the process of investigating solar. They have formed an arm of their church that produces information about solar, about how to do it, and encouraging churches and other religious entities to go to solar as part of their obligation to preserve this wonderful world that we have. They provide interim financing, which is sometimes a deal breaker one way or the other for installing solar. And they provide it not only to their church congregations, they are open to providing it to other denominations as well. And so if this passes, I would hope that maybe there might be some consideration given to this issue of encouraging solar.
I don't know who has told you no. I'm really surprised in my dealing with World Church officials and the committees there that someone would tell you no on solar. There is a resolution that I presented 2 weeks ago that asks the mission centers and congregations to set up pilot kind of things, demonstration things, so that young people will know. And so that resolution itself would fly in the face of telling you no. But we'll have to see what happens when we go to conference. I would like to comment on the solar. The major complaint about solar is the cost of the. Am I getting an echo or what? Somebody. Anyway, the complaint about the solar is that the rare earth materials necessary for the solar, extracting those is causing damage to the earth. That is absolutely a true statement. What isn't compared, though, is the amount of damage, any way you calculate it, they are doing to get the rare earth compared to the fossil fuel industry and the damage they do to the earth. And people who tell you that, well, you shouldn't use solar because it's damaging the earth, don't ever tell you about the cost of the fossil fuel and what it's doing to the earth. So the argument for me breaks down very quickly. Yes, I grant there is some damage, but it is so minuscule in comparison that I think it's a far better way to go. Was there a second question, comment? Somebody else?
So David, I totally agree with that. And, it was my conclusion that yes, there are negatives with solar panels, but if you look at the magnitude of everything, it's the best we can do at the moment, despite the fact that it's nowhere near perfect, but it's a whole lot better than burning fossil fuels. And what World Church told us we could not do, they didn't tell us we couldn't install solar, they told us we couldn't take the 30% federal credit.
Ah, that's a totally different issue, isn't it?
Well, yes and no.
It has the same effect, but
Right, it does, yeah.
What was the reason for not being allowed to take the 30% credit?
Well, how deep do you want to get into this? Let me see if I can give you a sort of a high level. In order to apply for the federal credit, you have to file what's known as a 990T, which is like the church version of a IRS 1040. And the World Church does not want us doing that because they have tried to not have anybody filing those tax returns. And I can't get enough information to find out what's really behind that. I have some suspicions that I don't like, but nevertheless, it comes down to questions of the nervousness of the church about letting the federal government know what we're doing.
okay, how does a tax rebate help an organization like the church that is tax-free?
That's an interesting question too, because about 2 years ago, the IRS made a change and decided that for nonprofits, they would be willing to hand the nonprofit the cash instead of requiring it to
Oh,
be taken as a credit against taxes paid.
that would be nice
Very nice, yes, if we could do it.
if we could do it. Yeah.
But the World Church says you can't take that, you can't file that form.
Okay.
Well, let me commend both of you, because David, I think you had solar panels on your house for approaching 20 years. And
Since 2011.
okay, and Robert, to see those panels at Camp Nauvoo uh, gave me a thrill this summer, and I hadn't realized that you'd spent $250,000 to get those, but I can imagine that with all the campers and the electricity utilized in the lodge and beyond, that should cover the expenses of the electrical expenses of the campgrounds quite adequately, and therefore provide a fundamentally uh, free space that is a non-proliferation kind of space. I'm pleased to see that we have people experimenting and supporting it. I would, however, on the forum, want to encourage people who have alternative views to express them. So
Mhm.
if there are those who have views contrary to the solar panel support that Robert and David have given us, then and want to address the resolution that would encourage the church to participate in the non-proliferation treaty, then those voices should be heard as well.
We do think at Camp Nauvoo that the solar system is very prominent and that it makes a definite statement about what we think about this topic.
I find it interesting that at Nauvoo, you also have the pioneering work by Dan Moffat, who put a set of solar panels down by his house, and his house dates us back to 1823 and has been continuously occupied by the Moffat family for 200 years. And for him to be putting solar panels on to make sure that that he's attempting to secure the energy for the future is to me a delightful addition. And I found him, and they are Catholic, of course, so to be to appreciate that you have precedents in the Nauvoo area for other people recognizing that need and wanting to pioneer with it. I'm gratified to know and appreciate Dan Moffat as well.
Okay. Terry Walker, go ahead. Oops, you're muted, Terry.
There we go.
Yep.
Most people to deal with solar will have a large battery system to use it at night. So I'm wondering what the provision that you guys want for solar when you can't use it for half the time.
I can address that. There is actually one argument against solar, which is based on that, and which says that the electric grid, the people who run the electric grid have to provide electricity in the dark hours as well, and that therefore they have to produce more fossil burning systems in order to allow for that. And that is one of those threads. But for us, if we look at it just for us in sort of a micro sense, we are grid tied, which means that when we produce excess electricity in the daylight hours, that goes down the grid to other people. And at night, we get electricity back from who knows where. You know, and so there are two very different ways of running a solar system. One is called grid tied because it ties into the electric grid that way. The other is not grid tied, and so it's a standalone kind of system. And in that case, you would definitely be shut down at dark unless you had batteries.
Okay, let me throw one thing at you. When years ago, when people in Utah were urged to have solar, a lot of people bought that because the power company agreed to pay them back. Well, a lot of the users thought it was going to be that the price they were getting to get in, and the power company said, no, 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 we give you the real low rate. And so they kind of lost their enthusiasm for solar because of that. So has that been factored into the issues about the church having the solar?
So it's not a part of the World Church's consideration. It seems to be not very extensive. But what we've done here at Camp Nauvoo is that one of the reasons we pursued this so aggressively was that we had an opportunity with the major electric producer here called Ameren, that because the state required them to provide us a better deal than that. So what happens is the electric that we produce that goes to the to Ameren, we get full retail credit for it. And what you're talking about is the normal situation where you buy electricity whenever you buy it at retail, but when you sort of sell it back to the electric company, you do it at wholesale. So that particular nice one-to-one arrangement stopped January 1st of this year, and we were able to get in before that. So we actually have gone from maybe a 10-year payback period to a 3 to 4 year payback period. A wonderful deal, but only because the state legislature forced the utility company to do that to get enough people doing solar to meet their objectives.
I would comment on that one from my experience. If the network company that you're working with provides net metering, effectively meaning your meter runs backward when you pull electricity back from them until you've used the amount you gave them, solar energy becomes very, very, very good for, I think, both. In Iowa, the law says if you're a regulated utility, you have to do net metering. After I got my solar panels in, I found out Lamoni is not regulated, and they decided they were not going to do net metering. So they pay me 3.6 cents for anything that I sell them. And then they charge me back retail for anything that I use. Not only that, they have the kind of policy you may find on other companies where the higher your use is, the lower your rate is. And so I pay a higher rate than my neighbors because I use less electricity. So the amount that I end up paying for electricity is not, I don't have the benefit that I had even thought I'd come close to. However, I have, according to the meters, I have saved over 55 tons of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. That's worth it to me.
Now, I've investigated several different major utilities related to people that I'm connected with, and they all have some variety of that net metering, some of which is not very attractive. Are we really down in the woods here? I love this because I spent so much time investigating it, but Paul, you're going to have to make a call here about whether we get further into solar or not.
I welcome the comments from the group. That's the guideline, Robert. Let's let the people ask the questions, make the comments, and go from there. We do want to allow David to give us a briefing on the nonviolence issue, because that's another one that I really hoped to have a briefing on tonight.
Okay, very as quickly as I can do it. The 2019 World Conference adopted a resolution, and I'm going down to the bottom, resolved that the position, I need to expand that somehow. Resolved the position of the Community of Christ on nonviolence be referred to the First Presidency for a report and a statement to be presented to the 2022 World Conference. So notice at that point, we kicked it back to the theocracy to deal with. There was no conference in 22 because of the COVID, so we had a conference in 23. And here's the report that the presidency brought back. They raised the question, should the First Presidency continue to develop a statement on the role of nonviolence in the pursuit of peace on and for the earth and in the life and mission of the church? And they did that survey. This is the delegates. Full support over 1,000. In fact, if you take the tentative, moderate, and full support, there's like 90% of the delegates said yes, continue. So the First Presidency then created a draft on nonviolence, and the draft, let's see, the draft is informed by feedback received from the church since 2019, as well as input from the Standing High Council, the World Church Teams, and the World Church Leadership Council. Then they sent that draft out to us as members saying, your input is important. The statement is presented to the church for feedback with a deadline of February 28th, 25. So we got that. Let's see. Come on, where is it? There. Here's the statement they sent back with the changes that they made, highlighting, striking out what they struck out, underlining what they added, and made the changes as they felt was appropriate after the statement. So here is the statement as they changed it. This is a statement on violence to be considered by the 2025 World Conference. We affirm that nonviolence is a means to embody the gospel message modeled by the teachings and life of Jesus Christ. Notice it used to say the peaceful one, but teachings and life of Jesus Christ. In pursuing God's justice, those who use nonviolence seek positive change through means guided by the Spirit that do not bring physical, emotional, spiritual, or relational harm to oneself or creation. Worldwide, did say we believe, but they changed it. Worldwide examples teach us that nonviolent actions often lead to transformative and peaceful results. We acknowledge that violent actions can often lead to more violence, making peace impossible. We uphold nonviolence that promotes healing, reconciliation, advocates for the vulnerable, cares for the environment, and creates a just and peaceable society aligned with God's vision for all creation. Therefore, the community of Christ, recognizing and celebrating the worth of all persons and the sacredness of creation, encourages the use of nonviolence whenever possible to seek justice. How we decide when nonviolence is possible involves a continuous effort undertaken by each of us, both individually and collectively, as we follow Jesus Christ, the peaceful one, the Son of the living God, Word made flesh, Savior of the world. That's the resolution, or that's the resolution on nonviolence as it now stands. And you saw that there were huge, significant changes. Well, I don't know how significant. I had the committee that met every Tuesday night, and we spent quite a bit of time on it. One thing that we pushed on pretty hard, and they agreed, they had the statement for the most vulnerable, and we suggested to them that required a checking of all and selecting. Some of them wouldn't get taken because they're not the most vulnerable. We wanted it to be all vulnerable, and we see that they struck out most. So whether just us or whether others said the same thing, that's a change at least that we recommended that they accepted. One more thing I want to point out. This is down in the section further context if the statement is approved. I want this sentence. We recognize the sincerity of those on the grounds of conscience work in professions focused on peacekeeping, including military and law enforcement. In addition, we recognize the sincerity of those who refuse to work in these professions, also on the grounds of conscience. We are united in our common commitment to Christ, even amid our diverse perspectives about and the shortcomings regarding how we respond to God's call to pursue peace. Okay, that's the quick summary of the nonviolent document. James, got your hand up.
Go ahead, James.
Okay, are the presentations done? I don't want to step on anybody's time to present discussion.
We're through. I'm through, except for answering questions, comments.
Proceed, James.
Okay. Well, actually, I have comments on a couple of different issues that we've raised here, and they aren't related. So I'll just raise them if you want to discuss them separately, or just have me raise one of them and let other people talk. I can understand that. Going back to the issue of your funds, um, I'm kind of maybe particularly interested in this, given my background as a business lawyer, but also it touches on other subjects that I've been studying recently. Um, if I understand correctly, the reason given for the World Church um, taking these funds is to meet the pension, continuing needs to meet the pension obligations. That did I understand that correctly? Okay, so this is a general observation, not a specific observation about, that the focus of your point here. But this is this touches on a much larger issue. Um, the on a worldwide basis, um, the issue of pensions and care for the elderly is a crisis, and it's a crisis that's going to grow and grow and grow and grow due to declining birth rates. Um, there are this is an issue that goes. I mean, it's important for the community of Christ. I'm not saying, but I'm just saying this touches on a much broader issue. I mean, for example, in all the chit chat about the new pope, everybody was saying that they're shocked that everyone assumed there would never be a pope from the United States. And among the comments that I frequently see about kind of rationalizing why the Cardinals decided nonetheless to go with an American to be the Pope was that the Vatican is facing a major pension crisis, a huge pension crisis. And, people speculate that the reason the Cardinals said, let's put an American in there is because American Catholics are the prime possible sources for plugging the Vatican's looming pension shortfall. So they figured maybe an American Pope would be better at getting money from American Catholics to fill this huge financial crisis that the Vatican is facing on that very same issue. But of course, the issue is you have that issue when you have a declining demographic. In other words, if you're constantly getting new sources of money and you can meet these things, but when your birth rate is falling and your membership is falling and so forth, your contributions are falling, then you're on something that is arithmetically impossible. In other words, you're never going to solve it. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse. In the United States, the Social Security reserve funds are going to expire, used up within 10 years, and there is no solution other than to raise taxes or to have the federal government start to subsidize Social Security with general tax revenues. I mean, that's a whole. But I'm just saying this touches on a broader issue. And the point I would make with regard to your specific resolution is that this step that you're objecting to is only a stopgap. It's not going to resolve your pension shortfall issue because it's just only going to get worse. And so raising the issue now on this one specific objection is you might want to put it in the context of the larger issue that unless the community of Christ can substantially increase its overall revenues, sorry to get all businessy about this, they're just kicking the can down the road by grabbing your savings money, because the issue is not going to go away unless they either substantially increase the revenue by hugely increasing your membership, or by cutting your benefits. which is something that's going to have to start happening with a lot of pension funds. Like I mentioned previously, the Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation, if a pension that is a plan that's through the PBGC does go, into default and can't, has to turn back to this government funded corporation to, to finance its obligations. One of the steps the PBGC is authorized to do is to cut the pensions that it pays out. It can come in and says, okay, we'll cover your pensions, but people only get 80% of what they were promised. And that's obviously, as you say, raises a lot of moral issues. So that's just a broader comment. I have a comment on the climate issue thing, but maybe I'll stop here and see if anybody has any pushback on what I just said about your pension issues.
Well, the World Church, after their major disasters, or maybe even before it, I can't remember, switched away from a pension system to, I guess, a 401k kind of providing matching funds into an investment that is then managed by the employees, so that in the future, hopefully that will not come back to bite the church.
Yeah, and that's what most private corporations have done.
Yeah.
And it's my understanding that the pension fund is now fully funded. However, you're exactly right, James. There are expenses other than the pension. And with the decreasing all the way around, it's going to be a tough road to hoe if things don't change.
Right. And so anyway, so it seems to me as an outsider that this grabbing your savings accounts is just a stopgap that's not going to permanently solve. It's going to come back around. Down the road at some point they're going to need money from. You're going to need to find something else to get some money to if there's not any substantial increase in contributions on a kind of long-term permanent basis. Okay, if no one else wants to jump in here, I was going to make a comment about the climate resolution. And that was just a point of curiosity. I can see the point of such a resolution if, in fact, my speculation, and it's purely a speculation, that this mission center in the Northwest also includes British Columbia. That's an immediate live political issue in Canada, is resistance to building this pipeline across British Columbia. And it also implicates a lot of Indigenous people have objected because it would go across some Indigenous lands in British Columbia, as I understand it. So I can see the point of such a resolution if the point is to say we want the community of Christ in British Columbia to weigh in on this immediate present political issue and oppose this pipeline. I can see the relevance of that, and then there's a whole bunch of issues, one side or the other, that you could argue about. But I mean, it's certainly, I suspect that, kind of in Canada, knowing kind of how Canadian politics works a little tiny bit, I suspect that if the Community of Christ membership in British Columbia were to want to weigh in on this, they would not be alone amongst religious bodies who have opposed this pipeline. It's extremely controversial. But my other question is beyond things like that. And what's the, I just, what does the Community of Christ leadership do if this resolution is passed? I mean, I know that you have this non-binding treaty that you'd like to sign up for, okay, that's fine. A lot of other churches have probably signed up for it too, and it means nothing from a practical point of view. But there's in your resolution, again, kind of approaching this as a kind of a nasty old business lawyer. I mean, there's so much, wiggle room. Well, maybe that's a polite term in that resolution that like, for example, the just transition. Well, just transition, that's an argument that can be used against any environmental action. You raise the issue of nations, poor nations that are dependent on oil revenues. There is an argument that the whole environmental movement is simply a luxury of wealthy white people who, don't want to, have to put up with, their a slight decline in rainfall in their wealthy white temperate climates, whereas many of the measures that the environmental movement proposes are going to be very, very, very harmful to the poor peoples of the world. That's a big, huge debate, and this whole just transition is wiggle room, which you basically could freeze the whole debate if you really took it seriously, because there are major counter arguments that poor people need to use fossil fuels, and this is just a luxury of people like Al Gore who fly around on their gas, carbon dioxide generating private jets to have conferences, when in fact their personal wealth is all invested in windmills and stuff like that, and they have a personal financial incentive to be promoting this. Now that's a whole big issue, I know, and I don't want to get into it on this call. But my question is, beyond some specific action like signing up for this treaty, or maybe giving the British Columbia members of the Church of Christ a basis to join this local political debate, which maybe is happening, what happens when you do a resolution like this?
There was another piece of that resolution, James, that if it passes, the AIP investment will not be spending or putting money on fossil fuel producing companies.
Okay.
So there is that movement. Also, I would comment that climate change has had a major impact and will continue to have a major impact on the poor people of the world, far more than on the rich people. And that's why that I lost the term. That's why that signing up for that, it's the poor people of the world, the people of the world who are being punished by climate change, who wrote that and are asking for help. Quit producing more fossil fuels. You're killing us.
Okay, I understand. So a disinvestment from fossil
That's not,
fuel
excuse me,
companies.
James, that's not to deny what you said.
Mm-hmm.
That is also true. But you balance that, I have to lean toward we've got to try to help the poor people of the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so just to try to narrow down my huge, comment that was wandering all over the place. So disinvestment from fossil fuel companies, signing that treaty that was mentioned, or not non-binding treaty, and perhaps local actions, like I again speculated that British Columbia members of the Community of Christ might have wanted to be involved in their local dispute about the pipeline that's proposed. I mean, what other actions would the world church leadership what other actions would you expect the world church leadership to undertake if this resolution is passed?
I don't think this resolution directly affects this, but we have resolutions already on the book, and we've already seen the world church is producing materials to help our people understand climate change and what the effect is and what they can do individually to try to help out. And there are materials being produced. Our reunions or our family camps last summer, the educational materials during the camps were all based on climate change.
Oh, okay.
So I think that will continue.
Let me add to that, James. There's also, I think, a very significant political difference here in the sense that we don't necessarily look to our leadership to tell us what to do. This is a resolution coming from the people into the People's Conference, a democratic conference in which we inform each other about our interests and ask for the people to make things happen. So here we are tonight having a conversation about it, which we would hope to expand the awareness of people, and this kind of grassroots up kind of information is, I think, the well, at least as important as anything that would be coming forth from the first presidency. I would say the quest to become a prophetic people means that we don't look that much to the leadership for prophecy, but the good messages often come from the people.
I don't, again, I'm not recalling, apologize, the exact wording. So was the wording of the resolution, I guess I picked up on some specific actions that would have to be carried out by the World Church, but was the wording also generalized so that it would cover what you're describing, Paul? So it says the community of Christ. So when it says here, the community of Christ, you see that as meaning individual members and individual congregations undertaking efforts, as well as the central administration.
Yes.
And go to the bottom resolution, because it
That-
does call upon members, congregations, jurisdictions.
Right. Although there is some things where you say the World Church should do also. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. No, that's okay. Thank you. That's very enlightening to understand that's how you would understand this resolution.
Yeah, one of the real delights of our conference is that we get together as an international body, generally making friends and building bridges of peace one to another. I was with my cousin today when she got a phone call from a gentleman from India who had just come in to be a delegate, and she had been in India, and so he was calling her because they had a chance to renew their friendships. That's one of the bridge building elements that makes it so well. He in the follow-up conversation, he indicated he'd be coming to Lamoni for 4 days, and so I was able to invite him to come take a tour of the Joseph Smith III home, and he was happy to acquiesce to that invitation. So there's the networking that happens in a conference like this among the common ordinary members and delegates is an extremely important element of our whole movement.
Okay, so on the very last one that you've got up on the screen here, resolve the Community of Christ declare its support for just and responsible fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty. So would your understanding be that that means that the World Church should sign on to this like other churches have? Or is that saying, well, we just kind of encourage all members of the Community of Christ to support this non-proliferation treaty?
My answer would be both.
Both.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Both of us, definitely.
Okay. So this would be there would be something to come from this resolution, even if the World Church said, "Oh, we kind of don't want to get that." I mean, my church, of course, is that's a whole complicated issue, but they often will shy away from political sounding things on the excuse that they're political and they're trying to be politically neutral. So if your World Church leadership took that position, you'd say, well, okay, that's, we don't like that. But if individual members want to join in or individual congregations want to support this non-proliferation treaty, then that makes this resolution worthwhile, even if the World Church decides to shy away from this extent of political engagement.
I think maybe the most important thing will be that hopefully people will do research and find out what this fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty is and become that much more aware of what's going on in the world.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that's useful. No, that's worthwhile. I can see that. Okay, I'll shut up for now. But thank you. Let me say thank you for sharing this, and
Yes.
I certainly join some of my co-religionists who participate in this group in expressing some admiration that you all can have a method of discussing these issues in the broader body.
Thanks, James, and we appreciate that support. Boyd, go ahead, please.
Well, as an outsider, again, I'm not a member of the church here, and I'm just kind of looking at it from an outsider's view. It has the appearance to me that it's blurring the lines between a political action committee and an actual church. It's because you're a tax exempt organization as a church, and now you're pursuing, whether it's good or bad or whatever, but it is a political football. I mean, this thing here, I mean, there's some strong opposition on both sides. I mean, it's and getting involved in issues like this as a church, it's divisive. If I'm, looking at, like I say, as an outsider, and this is the kind of issues that could split a church, because you're going to have certain people that's going to be really upset about it if this gets passed. They would be upset about it. And then you got others that are all for it. And, it seems to me that a church should be mostly focused on teaching of Christ and repentance and teaching the principles of salvation. But this here is, whether it's a good or bad thing, one way or the other, it could be argued both ways. But when you start getting to political actions, I mean, to me, is something that the members should be involved with, in other, other organizations, or whether you support a political treaty or not. But it doesn't seem to me to be appropriate for a church to be involved with. That's just my feelings with it.
Yes, that's a risk. The the church, most of the people in the church strongly believe in the sacredness of creation. And so if you strongly believe in the sacredness of creation, that puts the treatment of the earth in the spiritual realm. Yes, it laps over into the political realm. And our hope is, what we encourage is, even if you totally disagree, we want you to be part of our fellowship, and we will treat you as a person of worth, even if you totally disagree with us, because we also believe on the worth of all persons. So, yes, what you're saying is a risk, but that's where we are. At least that's where I am as a member of the community of Christ.
Let me add a historical perspective for you, Boyd. When the church was founded, slavery was legal in the United States. And in 1835, what we have in our Doctrine and Covenants as Section 112 made it clear that we support governments that indenture people. That section is still there. It needs a historical context, I think, to be understood. It's not a revelation. It was a policy statement. But the fact that the church was attempting to play a middle road there, while at the same time we find many of our church members, including the Prophet's family, were involved as abolitionists. And as abolitionists, they were defying the 1793 fugitive slave law to be able to help people who happened to have dark colored skin and help them gain freedom, because they believed that the gospel of Christ required them to advocate for the freedom from bondage of other people. The Book of Mormon makes a very strong set of statements about freeing people from bondage. And for the individuals to do that, and then for the church to make adjustments on that stand throughout the ages, you can follow that the church really has always been involved in the politics, and to some extent at least, and certainly the members are. And so while you raise a very good question, a very good issue, to what extent should the church be involved in political issues? Because we believe in the agency of man, stewardship, worth of all persons, sacredness of the earth, the development of a community of peace, then we have hand in hand a whole bunch of motivators that tell us, that nudge us, that guide us, that encourage us to be politically active, in particular in opposition to those things like slavery that we feel very strongly are immoral. And so, in terms of abusing the earth, those things which are immoral, again, need our opposition. So it becomes a tug and pull that we are continuing to struggle with. I would acknowledge that, but I would submit to you that no responsible Christian can legitimately deny his stewardship of the sacredness of the earth and the worth of all people. Therefore, there's definitely a religious role in every political issue.
Let me ask you a question. Because I'm totally with you as far as being responsible to the environment. It's God's creation. Is it possible that there are people that are opposed to that treaty, that totally love the environment, and yet they're adamantly opposed to it because they feel that it's going to have the opposite effect than actually helping? And if that's so, as a church, could such a resolution like this not divide them away from you? Do you know what I mean?
If you'll notice, when David was making comments about the nonviolence issue, there was specific provision within that for those people who are in good conscience, supporting the military, supporting police, and involved in careers that may very well cause them to be doing violence. There's also the support for those people of conscience who choose other kinds of careers and choose to be conscientious objectors, for example. And so the idea that there should, as David was suggesting, there should be room at the table for people of all vantage points so that we can discuss. One of our significant Doctrine and Covenants statements out of 162, I believe it is, says, reason together in love, and the truth will prevail.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
You asked the question in such a way, is it possible? Absolutely. And not to do anything that doesn't directly compare, and I don't want it to compare, but there's a flat earth society out there. Is it possible people disagree? Absolutely. We still welcome you, anyone, as welcome you to the table, as Paul suggested, regardless of your position.
Go ahead, Jake.
the history of, in the RLDS church with the ordination of women. That was not handled in my opinion, purely in my opinion, that was not handled by the church officials in such a way to make people feel of worth all the way across and allow everyone at the table. Many people felt they were kicked out of the church because of the way that that was handled. Hopefully, we've learned a lesson.
Okay. James, go ahead, please.
Well, two quick points. First of all, further to Boyd's point, I think that this is a matter which we could discuss for hours and hours and hours, and I sort of want to push us into that. This is a bit why I asked the question earlier about what specifically are supposed to come out of this climate resolution, because this is a highly debated field, just from a substantive point of view. I mean, I take your point, David, that you're being and you're a scientist, so I defer to you on several different levels. But there's very serious debates about what the effective means of addressing climate change is, and this I don't know what this treaty says, but it's entirely possible that this treaty is advocating things that are still very much in scientific dispute. And so I mean it just it's a question whether a church should how much a church should insert itself into these kinds of debates, which are secular, really. I mean, it's a secular question whether, it's a religious question whether we are stewards of the environment. And I think, we can be pretty comfortable with that. But then you come to a secular question of what is the effective, methodology? I mean, is it carbon tax credits? Are there prohibitions? Do you build the pipeline or don't you build the pipeline? These are all secular issues about which there could be very reasonable, substantive secular disputes. And I guess the point is that there's a point at which organizations of a religious nature should express principles, but not get dragged into the secular argument about what really is the most efficacious way of achieving goals. So I would just, make that point. One other point on the nonviolence resolution, just a point of information to you all, a query is, am I correct in recalling that Stacy Cram is an Air Force veteran?
Yes.
So I wonder if that particular line about acknowledging military and law enforcement people, maybe she had a little input on that.
I was not there, so I can't be sure, but my understanding was in 2019, when the original resolution was presented that got referred to the first presidency, there was tremendous opposition on the floor from the military and police forces because of the way it was worded. And that came long before Stacy Cram got involved.
Oh, okay.
Now, that doesn't mean Stacy Cram didn't have something to do. I'm just saying that's not been just a Stacy Cram issue.
Okay.
Want to comment on the scientific part. I have to admit that scientists have not done a good job of teaching people about climate change. When 97% of climate scientists agree that climate change is happening and people are causing it, and they present facts for that, the facts don't handle the secular people that you're talking about. because that comes down to whose ox is being gored. And so I can't really, I don't know how to deal with it myself as a scientist. I've always felt like, well, if you see the facts, how can you argue against it? Well, unfortunately, that has not proven to be true at all when it comes to climate change. And there's, if you say we're not going to allow that pipeline to go through, but this particular farmer wants the pipeline to go through because he's going to get rentals from it that he really looking forward to, he's going to fight you.
Okay.
So how do we deal with it? I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm with you. It's just an issue that it's sensitive for a religious body that is advancing moral principles that are probably generally agreed, like we are stewards of the creation. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty specifics, that farmer may be motivated by his desire to get those rentals, but he can probably, put a bunch of PhDs at the table saying, no, this is actually good, and it's a good idea, and this won't, do that much damage, and so forth, and the debate goes on and on. And if there's an argument that religious bodies should express the principles, but keep their hands out of nitty-gritty secular arguments, which is what these things become, because as you correctly note, there's a lot of different people who have oxes in these situations.
It's interesting that looking back a little bit, Steve Veazey has a degree in earth sciences.
Oh,
And so some of the revelations that we've had, people who are like the ones you're talking about say, oh, that's just Steve Veazey. That's not a real revelation. The church accepted it as a revelation, but whether, you can debate that also. How far does a revelation go outside of the revelator's mind? And we all the way back to Joseph Smith when we start dealing with that issue.
And I, just to put another example in here, during the COVID times, when the LDS Church came out in favor of vaccinations, of course, our president, Russell M. Nelson, was a prominent surgeon, medical scientist, and there were people in my church, despite our very hierarchical, centralized, structure, who nonetheless said very much the same things. President Nelson's only doing that because he's biased, because he's has this background as a medical person, and he's going with the medical establishment that he was a part of, and he's not looking at all these counter arguments against the COVID vaccine and so forth. So that's just another example of that from our side.
Yes, excellent example. Thank you. We live with that dichotomy.
Yeah, and that's kind of inherent in the restoration tradition. This idea that mortal men could be prophets. It's kind of inherent in the entire concept of the restoration, going back to the beginning, as you pointed out, back to Joseph Smith.
Jonathan Neville will be back with us in July to report on his Rational Restoration book, which I think addresses this rather nicely. And I'm very pleased to be able to host him again, because the whole question of to what extent we are reasoning together effectively, we're a rational people, to what extent are we following leadership that we're following with rather blind faith. Where the question of how much reason we use. David and I grew up under the tutelage of a mother who, when asked, "What is the gospel?" she explained, "All truth. And it's your job to go find it." And for us to be reasonable people, rational restoration, going to find the truth, working it out, and laboring to implement the facts that support it. That's part of our heritage, and I think probably catching David and myself advocating for that subconsciously, whether even consciously. So yes, I'm looking forward to Jonathan Neville's presentation. We are approaching 10 o'clock, and I do have a trip to Lamoni and then to Nauvoo tomorrow. And so I think, unless there are other questions or comments, I would like to sing, "There's an old path where the sun shines through life's dark storm clouds from its home of blue. In this old path, made strangely sweet by the touch divine of his blessed feet." This hymn, by the way, was written in Lamoni in 1903, written by Alexander Smith's daughter, Vida, while she was sitting at church, the brick church in Lamoni. And that afternoon, she went over to Joseph Smith III's house and shared her words with her cousin, Audentia. And Audentia and Vida put together the hymn. So the hymn was written in that one day. And it continues, "Find the old path, 'twill be ever new, for the Savior walks all the way with you." And the next verse, "In this old path are my friends most dear, and I walk with them with the angels near." And the last verse, "'Tis an old path, shadowed vales between, yet I fearless walk with the Nazarene. In this old path, made strangely sweet by the touch divine of his blessed feet." Thank you, friends, family. May the good Lord's blessings be with you for this week and forever. And good night.
Paul,
Yes.